Welcome to Movies That Matter, the podcast about recent films going above and beyond the call of box office returns to boldly explore a social issue affecting people's lives. I'm Nicole Finari, and with me today is...
Christopher Robinson.
And we have a very special guest with us because you guys know how much I love Own Voices, and we are overanalyzing...
The Farewell.
Yep. And we have...
Daniel, yep.
So there was actually a bit of a debate, which I'm glad to put on the podcast, over what counts as first-generation American. I feel like if you were the first generation born in America, then you're first generation. But some people have it as first generation that immigrated to America. So I don't actually know what the right answer is.
I've seen it bounce between the multiple two.
Yes.
I've seen definitions that sort of demonstrate that first generation would be those who are the first arrivers and actually have set foot upon the land. But there's actually sort of a second generation, there's a 1.5 generation, a third generation as well, too.
Well, what would you count yourself as?
I'm probably a 2.5 generation.
Okay. And we are not that close, which is why we wanted you here to kind of give that perspective. So, quick synopsis of The Farewell, written and directed by Lulu Wang, and based on her real-life story of a Chinese-American woman who returns to China to fake a wedding with the rest of her family so they can say goodbye to her grandmother, who they have not told is dying of cancer. Starring in a very breakout role for her, Awkwafina. So, what did you think? I'll let Christopher go first and I'll let Dan chime in.
I enjoyed it.
Okay.
It was very well done. I liked what the direction of the film, and I liked what the choices that the director made. And it was a great feel. I was originally, when I was originally watching it, I was having concerns about Awkwafina's demeanor and how she seemed so passive and so just blah.
Yeah.
But then I remember that the director came in front of us, and then the director is also kind of introverted and keeps herself just is so tiny and just didn't like speaking or anything. So I said, okay, I can understand. That's why you chose to do that.
Yeah, quite a departure for her. What did you think, Dan?
I've seen Awkwafina in other roles, and it was kind of jarring to see her in this one. I saw a little bit of her character pop out every now and then from the other roles, but I wasn't expecting this to be sort of a tearjerker on a personal note. And one thing that Christopher was talking to me about, if it was okay, I recently lost my grandmother.
Oh, wow. This was really personal for you.
Yeah. And so for me, it was, I actually started tearing up when she first saw her grandmother in person again, because she looked like, had the demeanor of, and reminded me a lot of my grandmother. And although Awkwafina, or actually I should say the main character, had the ability to communicate with her grandmother, albeit in very sort of simplified language, I wasn't able to. But we did share a lot of really close relationship aspects, and some of the things that they noticed in the film, or they showed in the film, were such as you look skinny. Those kinds of nuances are very typical for Asian families specifically to talk about.
Christopher, you sent me an article, which I'll post in the show notes. Apparently, Awkwafina spent hours and hours and hours, put a lot of work into actually learn Chinese. She didn't speak it. And Lulu Wang had talked about how it's atypical for even, it was because she was born in China and lived there those first 6 years. Most Chinese Americans don't speak Chinese.
Yeah. This is from what I was gathering from what I know about Lulu Wang, her history seems to be of a different generation of immigrants than my family is. I say 2.5. My father was born in China and immigrated over when he was in his elementary years as well. My mother was born in the United States.
Oh, okay.
Her parents had come over earlier. But that was back in the 60s and 70s, a very different sort of immigration reason. My parents and their families, they came over because they were fleeing from World War II. They're helping out with the war and things like that. So they came over here, and they are more of the stereotypical industry when they came over. Restaurant owners, working as cooks and things like that. And so education was a little bit more limited. but they wanted the best for their kids.
Right.
Which I thought was definitely true in the movie. In the movie, her parents were, I think they were like very diplomats or scientists or...
Yeah. I don't think they say in the movie.
They don't say that more in depth, but like I know the uncle was a artist, so they were, and they seemed to be more understanding of the daughter's choice of career ish, considering. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I thought they were more. I wouldn't say not lax, but just more. Open to different career opportunities.
Yes,
that would never fly.
Yes,
in our generation's set.
But before we go too far down to some of the thematic elements, which we will reserve plenty of time to, I do want to kind of get into some of the heavy lifting of what this was like as a movie. So I have probably a pretty different perspective on the movie because I actually heard the This American Life story when it aired. So I already knew the story and I'd already heard the sort of radio documentary of the piece. So going into the movie, my bar was, what do you bring to this that you didn't already bring to the radio drama? And I've got to say, nothing good.
Oh, wow.
This movie has 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, and I'm going to be the person who, there's a lot of really great thematic elements that we'll get into, but as a movie, I just don't think it was very good.
Oh, wow. Wow. We get to have a good discussion here.
I figured. I was like, oh, God, I'm going to be the bee who didn't like the farewell.
No, like I said, I mentioned before, I love the directions he took. I love, like, I
hated it.
Oh, I love the shot when she was running through the streets to get, when she finally became complicit, said, okay, I have to protect my grandmother from knowing the truth, and she's running to the hospital. That's a spoiler, but there's the whole thing is a spoiler. Yeah, but I loved some of the choices that she made with just where she lingered, or the use of smoke, use of the bird finding a way into her apartment. I just loved the imagery of this movie, and it made me appreciate that perspective more.
Okay.
And it's funny that they're arguing about crab. I know crab versus lobster because we're over here where it's like, oh yeah, but the crab looks great from the different perspective, and just showing how the family was, the interaction with the family and the dealing with the family. I felt the imagery brought a lot to it. I felt that I loved all the actors in it. As Awkwafina, like I said, I was like hesitant and I thought it through about, because it's so different from her usual perspective.
Stand up straight. She spent the whole movie hunched over.
But then really I saw annoying. The director, and the director was hunching.
That's how she stands. Like,
yeah. So I was thinking like,
I felt like a real Chinese mother would have slapped her across the shoulders and been like, stand up straight.
Character.
But like she was, it also made sense when considering, like, I don't say the family, but the thing that when I first watched it, and then the family just saying, oh yeah, we were going to tell you your grandmother was going to die. We're just going to sneak over and visit her, and you were going to find out. I'm thinking like,
yeah, then that wasn't in the original radio story, and seemed very. Didn't make a lot of sense in the movie. But okay,
it showed me how she felt like an outsider from her family.
Right. So the biggest issue I have with the movie, first and foremost, I'm sure you won't be surprised. What was that soundtrack?
I was going to ask about the score.
It was horrible. It was totally incongruous with the rest of the movie. It just did not fit. And I was like, this is a movie about, the tension between Chinese and Americans. And you've got this weird sort of European classical music strings thing happening. And it was so jarring. It just took me out of it every moment that soundtrack came up.
I did, and as the music was playing, I'm like, why are they choosing this particular sound? Like all this opera,
very
Italian,
heavy.
Yeah, right.
And
I think it's cheaper.
It's cheaper, but
to be honest,
aside from technicalities. But I wonder if she meant to do that because the whole movie is nothing but dissonance, whether it be cultural dissonance or
I hear you.
dissonance. Yeah,
but it didn't work.
I don't know that she intended it to go that way, though.
Yeah. I found a lot of the cinematography, frankly, just cliche. There were just a lot of, like, reused shots.
This is she's a first-time director.
No, it's not. She's not. This is
sorry.
her
It's the second
movie.
film. The second movie. You're right.
But I will say, in all fairness to her, I just was coming off of 2 indie films I saw this year, which were both terrible story-wise, but really beautifully shot. High Life and Midsummer. Midsummer was incredible.
Yes.
So this was just felt like a really, like a huge fall off. I will say, though, the scene where she is talking to her grandmother in the foreground and in the background, they're going through that photo shoot, this like engagement photo shoot, was hilarious. And
yes, it was great.
It was great, and that was really well shot. And I feel like that poor Japanese girl is the unsung hero of this.
I mean, wait. Why is she the unsung hero, not because the boy, like, I don't think they wanted to get married at all.
So the cousin was doing it for his family, but can you
That's
imagine being
fair.
that girl who's like,
I need
your
you to get
boyfriend
married.
is like, we got to fake a wedding so we can.
See, are you sure it was faked? That's why I was confused, because I didn't get that impression.
It was pushed up, yes, but still, I thought
that's a real wedding. That's not a fake. That's
Yes.
the challenge. It was a real wedding after 3 months, and she's not pregnant, and like. They also talk about it in the movie, like, yeah, we have to say they known each other for like 6 months or a year beforehand to make it sound better. But yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot to get married. That's the familiar love there, and you're right. If she is willing to go along with that, that's I think that's one of the things that it showed the importance of family, and I loved how they showed the importance of family in this movie, and the importance of being able to make those sacrifices for each other.
Yes, I also thought the pacing dragged. There were parts that were pretty slow. Okay. Editing could have been a little bit tighter, and I think part of the problem is like she took what was probably around a half an hour radio story and then made it into an hour and a half movie, and that showed. I mean, the whole fellowship thing, like, that didn't endear me to Billy as a character, and it was left there hanging, and you didn't know why she was getting the fellowship. And she said, well, there's no resolution to the movie because real life doesn't have a resolution. And right. I was like, that's kind of a cop-out. Like, you didn't know how to end it. Like, I'm not kind of seeing you as, like, I
think that
the radio story ended in much better. Like,
but the radio story wasn't hers. I mean, when I say that,
it was literally hers.
No, but did she write the radio?
She wrote the radio story. It was her voice.
It wasn't edited or organized by the group about how it wasn't part of the NPR thing versus this is how she wanted to end her movie.
Exactly. But you got to hear the real voices of her mother and father, which were remarkably close to the actors, I gotta say. But that's the point I'm trying to make. Whoever produced it for This American Life, along with her, was able to just craft, frankly, a better product than this movie came out to be. And that's a weird bar to hold it to. I get that. I probably would have liked the movie better if I'd never heard.
Right. I think that's the issue, is that you keep comparing it to This American Life, which is there.
To be compared to.
It is there. But like, I think the movie, I mean, I haven't listened to This American Life story. I heard about it, but
it's really good. So I think, and it's interesting I'm doing it with both of you, I think one of the things I noticed about the movie, and I wonder if you did, because there's a little bit of, I feel like, unconscious bias there. All the male emotion in this movie was undercut for a laugh.
When I was in the movie theater, one thing that I noticed, there were certain scenes that, and just reflecting on the audience after leaving the theater, I myself being an Asian male, 2.5 generation, there were certain scenes that were meant to be funny and certain scenes that weren't meant to be funny. Right. But people in the audience were laughing at scenes that I didn't find funny, and they were quiet on scenes that were hilarious. Yeah. And I wonder if it's that same sort of like dissonance that she was deliberately setting up. There were cultural nuances that she was trying to set as comedic and others that were just reality.
Can you give us an example?
So one specific example was actually the wedding shoot scene, and that all that stuff going on in the background, and they were like having a very serious conversation, and people were laughing hysterically, saying like, "Oh, that's absurd." I'm like, "That's reality. People actually do that." And I was trying to listen to this very like dramatic conversation that they were having, and then people were like laughing hysterically in the background. all of them paying attention to what was going on in this like gaudy environment in the back of the set. And I was paying attention to the emotional cues from the two characters as they were trying to figure out how best to do this and the responsibility for them to do this. And there was another scene actually in the massage parlor. And the massage parlor, I was like, wait, what massage parlor? That is a very different kind of connotation. Yes. But in China, that's like, you want to go for coffee. Let's go to a massage parlor together. And the guys would just get real comfortable, strip down completely naked to each other and line up in a room and line up on a table and get a real massage, not a cheeky massage. But it was jarring to both see that play out. And there was also some other, I'm guessing, Asian Americans, maybe second generation, third generation kids also who were laughing along with the rest of the audience who didn't have that sort of like background experience. And not to say that I can speak for all of them, but that was just interesting to me. What did you guys think about the color schemes actually that they had used in America versus in China? Dark.
Yeah, no, I noticed that the lighting, and it was all sort of drab grays the whole time they were in America. It was pretty dull, and then it was like, Garrett made this last comment about Midsummer. It was like Wizard of Oz, like all of a sudden everything comes to life. I thought, yeah, I noticed that, there's another article I read about the movie where the director talks about, like how much Chinese people really love bright colors and love pastels, and that she, too, was often surprised by audience reactions, and that people don't think of Chinese people as, for lack of a better word, romantic. Like, they like pastels. They like love. They like these big sort of fairy tale photo shoots and all that stuff. And you can see, like, again, I think there were some things that were played for laughs under the radar. Me, who knows more about Japan, having lived there, you could see that Japanese girl, like, she kept bowing to everybody and nobody bowed back. Like, there were a lot of there was all of the interpersonal stuff in this movie was just so good. I just didn't think the like technical aspects of it were particularly good.
See, like I said, like it felt the New York scenes felt washed out, and I think it was appropriate because I think she felt better in China, and she still felt wistful in China. And there was a great conversation between the family about should we send our child to America or not, and talking about the pros and the cons, because it is a difficult question. It is a hard question, and it was also just nice to just get different perspectives. Yeah. And there was a cultural nuance, certain things that if you knew more about Chinese culture, and you said like Japanese culture, made things funnier or made you appreciate it a little bit more. I like that aspect of it. It was this was a dual production, because I think it was funded by a Chinese company and an American company for this. Yeah. So you could tell, and it was nice that most of the time the language was in Chinese, which was great. And they use English as a plot point. Sometimes it would switch to English, so they make sure the grandmother couldn't understand what it was saying.
One of the things I really like is that in the titles of the movie, that it comes up first in Chinese, and then the English words, the farewell, are overlaid over the Chinese, as if to, like, so right from like the get-go, she's sort of planting her flag and saying, hey,
this is Chinese.
This is a Chinese movie.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question about what they were all wearing to the wedding? You may not know, Dan, but I was like, this is a wedding? They seem very underdressed. For like how fancy that banquet room was, they were all in kind of more casual clothes, which I found surprising. And I was like, this is clearly a cultural thing, that this isn't like a very...
I'm trying to recall, actually, because...
She was just in like a t-shirt and a skirt.
Right, because he travels. He used her travel clothes. The grandmother
was...
Oh, Billy?
Billy, yeah. Nobody was dressed up. The men were in suits.
Only people were dressed up.
Were the bride and groom.
Well, the men were in suits for the groom. I mean, not the father. Right. The father of the groom was in a suit, but no one was wearing ties. Most of them were the casual, especially for the reception.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be everyone's going to be decked out in their finest.
No, one wedding that I did go to when in China, that's one thing that I just completely forgot about that. They were dressed down. The only people who are sort of obligated to dress are the immediate family. But, their idea of dressing up doesn't necessarily mean like suit and tie. That's more of like an American influence that more of them are dressing up that way. And even the photo shoot concept wasn't something that was common. They just said, this is like an American tradition, Western tradition, that everyone get dressed up in a wedding dress for the bride, and then the groom would get dressed up in a suit and tie, and we'll take pictures in all these fantastical European faux sets. And I think that's part of that weirdness of China as it's developed as a country from a third world nation into what it is today, and it's nothing been but influxes of influences from every direction, primarily Western, and there's some sort of nostalgia that I feel for Billy. I think my father probably would actually have more in common with Billy because he's actually first generation, came over when he was very young. And when I went to visit China with him, the one thing that he pointed out was that we were standing on the corner of a city block and we were looking down this ridiculously well-paved, groomed avenue with all these like, perfect trees. And he said, this all used to be farmland.
Oh, wow.
And it was just like 15 years ago. And you could sort of see the sort of nostalgia, longing, sort of despair in his voice saying that, I came back here hoping to see my old village and it's all been wiped out.
Yeah.
And I think Billy and her parents also feel that same sort of thing. And the reason why I asked about the color schemes before, because people in the back, like I mentioned before, were finding it hilarious that they were doing these photo shoots with this garish colors. And I use garish, and I'm only self-reflecting saying that that's actually some sort of bias on my part, coming from now an American perspective saying, oh, those are gaudy colors, gaudy quotation marks.
But I mean, it's like, I guess I'm coming in from I was coming from it that, it was completely, it's a set. I mean, it's just like I'm just thinking about when we did wedding photos or other people wedding photos, you have this setup thing that to make things look spectacular. And I said, okay, I can see that. You just do that. And then also we watch a lot of Korean dramas. So you also see a lot when they're doing the final wedding aspect, they do that same type of thing of like, oh, these sets that are just completely over the top for the look perfectly. And then I said, okay, I totally understand that. And it is kind of sad when you said your experiences with your audience, laughing at the wrong things and just kind of making you feel a little bit more self-conscious.
Outside, yeah. So that's not that I was wrong, but rather it's interesting to me from a racial and cultural perspective that there is a dissonance. I'm sure that Lulu Wang actually went through the same sort of feeling too. Like, I'm designing this with both an American and a Chinese perspective. And I want this to be a drama, but I also want this to be a comedy. And so she had to sort of choose. And maybe she was surprised at her audience's reaction just the same way because she said, that wasn't really meant to be funny, or that was meant to be funny. No one laughed. The cemetery scene is another one that comes to mind. Right. And they kept on
That was her real grandfather's grave.
Yeah.
Oh.
And that's her also.
She talks. Sorry, go ahead, Christopher.
Sorry. Yeah, like I said, that's her real grandfather's grave, and that was her real little nana.
Yeah.
Which is really cool.
Yeah.
Did a great job for her first time
acting. She was just being herself.
Yes.
she to be
quite
honest,
literally.
Yeah, both grandmothers reminded me of like either my grandmother or one of my friend's grandmothers, exactly the same like persona on the way they carry themselves.
Yeah.
Sort of matriarch type characters in the family.
Nai was great. She was so good. I actually, now that I'm thinking about it and you're saying that, Dan, it's interesting how I know if you've ever seen Ali Wong's stand-up routine, she has this thing where she's like, her and her husband are part fancy Asian and part jungle Asian.
Yes.
And I was like, I guess I never really thought about that before. But I'm kind of circling back to that about, most Americans' sort of first experience with Chinese culture is a Chinese restaurant, right? Where the decor is always, as you said, garish, tacky, over the top. So there probably is some sort of coded bias in us from that versus how we would think about, say, Japan and Japanese as being very elegant and very austere and,
That actually brings to mind that conversation she had with the hotel bellboy. He kept on asking her which one is better, America or China. And I had the exact same conversation with every single person I talked to in China, because I taught in China for about a year, knowing no Mandarin at the time. When I went into different locales, and they asked me, so you don't look Chinese, you look like you might be American. Are you American Chinese? I said, yes, I'm an American Chinese. They're like,
so they coded you American right off.
Yeah, because of the way, primarily the way I dressed.
Yeah.
I, at the time, had some like blonde streaks in my hair, which is like never done over there. It's either red all or black. But every single place that I went to, every locale, that was like the hot question was, which one is better, America or China? And I would say exactly the same thing that Lulu Wang and Billy both said. It's different. And it's not a concept that makes sense. It's got to be something always has to be on top. Something always has to be better than. And the fact that, she called attention to this particular sort of conversation. It could have been just some, conversation that she said, it's just, small talk. But she put a lot of emphasis on that particular conversation because it truly is that experience. And I think that's nice for the audience to experience. Like Billy, she didn't have the vocabulary to describe the difference between socio-political structures, cultural aspects in Mandarin. She just said it was different.
Right.
But it literally is just different.
So I haven't had that experience. I have never been to Italy, and I've never been to the Ukraine or Poland either. So I haven't gone back to any place that theoretically is my heritage or my culture. If you don't have to get into this if you don't want to. Like, how did it make you feel more American? Did it make you feel more Chinese? Like, how did it feel when you were there?
So things that I've read about both second generation and 1.5 generation, especially the students that I work with as I'm a teacher, a lot of them are 1.5 generation kids.
Right.
They came over when they were really young, or they came over and they were sort of born here. And they go through this struggle. Their parents don't speak English. Their parents only speak their first language, wherever that might be from. But all 1.5 generations and second generation kids always seem to have the same sort of dilemma. Like, I don't know which one I identify with. And I'm assuming that probably is the same case. I can't speak to it, but for biracial and multiracial kids, they're like, I don't know which identity I belong to.
You have to choose. Choose one.
Yeah, you're only allowed to have one. Like, So when people ask me that question when I was in China, like, which one's better? I'm just like, they're both good. I like both of them. Like, they're just different. There are some aspects that I really enjoy about America. There are some aspects that I really enjoy about China. But China is a
big place too.
Big place. It's relatively homogenous compared to the United States in terms of the folks that are represented in major cities, barring ethnic groups that are like minorities and things like that.
Right.
But
is that true even with you have two whole other languages, like you have Cantonese versus Mandarin, right? Like
there is cultural clashes that occur between Cantonese and Mandarin. And the same sort of concept happened to me in the United States too, where I was coming into New York City. I was living in Jersey for some years. I was the token Asian in the entire school. And so I didn't want to identify with Chinese. I didn't want to identify with Asian. I identified as I am a American who just happens to have some Chinese heritage.
Right.
When I came into New York, I never faced so much racism in my life until I went to my school in Queens,
right,
which was probably like 5% of every possible ethnicity you can think of was all represented in one school.
Mm-hmm.
And people started making their own groups. There was the Asian Americans, the Chinese Asian Americans. There was the Korean Asian Americans. There was the Hong Kongese. There was the Taiwanese.
I was going to say.
And so like the way, what you said, how you carried yourself immediately put you into a category. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder if she was experiencing that same thing when she went back to the hotel and said, they're different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got that impression as well.
Yeah, and there was definitely a strain in the movie where, so I feel like there's kind of two big pivotal scenes on that front. The one where they ask if, they're going to send so another member of the family who's still in China is talking about sending her son to America for university. And then she'll be about to, he'll totally come back. And Billy's parents, who obviously emigrated permanently to America, are like, are you sure about that? And if China's so great, why are you even sending him to America? So there is a moment there where both the sons have left, and they feel this tremendous guilt for having abandoned their grandmother, right? Or their mother, sorry. But they feel the need to sort of defend their choices.
Yeah, and like you said, it was the sister-in-law who stayed with her, right? The sister-in-law who stayed and took care of the grandmother, and like that, she was willing to stay and support her family. But she says, "Yeah, I need her little son Bao," which is another thing. But to send him off to America. But yeah, it's that guilt. I think I've seen that other type of guilt with, like, especially from my wife's family is from Liberia. I can see kind of that guilt of people who have left the nation, and should they go back to help, or should they stay and flourish? And what's your role? What's your responsibility? You can definitely see that kind of like struggle going on.
Yeah, and I feel like that's one of those universally felt things that everyone in the audience that has had that immigrant sort of experience of, you want the best for your child. And so there's a conflict that the parents have to go through with, I want the best for my child, but they're going to leave me behind. And coming from like a collectivist culture, like, who's going to take care of me? There's no one going to be there to be with me. The family should be staying together. And so Billy returning and all of the rest of the family returning back to the grandmother is almost like them having to face their guilt, the father and the brother having to face the guilt of leaving in the first place. So there's something in that too, I feel like.
Yeah, the brothers had been together for like over 20 years, right? Mm-hmm. That's what they said?
They said they've been together in China.
Together in China.
I sort of assumed like, that someone had gone to visit each other. But I did kind of think that was a really interesting tension, because that whole conversation was about sort of having it both ways, which for, my grandparents, when they emigrated, they were thrilled to get out. Nobody wanted to go back. Certainly on the Jewish side, nobody was going to be alive to go back to. And the whole sort of modern debate about chain migration was like, no, the whole point is you just send that first relative, and then they're just going to get to America and slowly bring every single person related to them
like
over.
Melania.
Yeah, absolutely, right? But so, it was very much a like, no one's going back. No one would even think of going back. And the idea was to get everybody else from the family over to America and not to split time. Yeah. And I think that's really changed.
Yeah, it has. And whenever we have the conversation, when people talk to me about that question, which one is better, the United States or China, I feel like that question is coming from a place of, so the chain migration theory was back when, things were not so great, but China's up and coming. We've got a booming economy. We have a huge number of cities that are, top tier cities now. So have we qualified yet? Have we made it to be equivocal to, if not better than, America? I feel like where that question might be coming from. Because they do go back now. And some of them do return because they just find it better that now that they've gotten a Western education, they can come back and be top of the game. And when people like me, who have never experienced China as a first generation kid, come back, you're like, even more so. See, they come back even after not being exposed to China. So there's some definite like immigrant themes going on over here that are really fascinating to me.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And, so I went to graduate school, and of course, graduate school is like 2/3 international these days, right? It's mostly non-Americans. And so, it was the tension. And there were the people who were there who were just like, I'm putting my time in, I'm going back. And I had friends who sort of similarly in that family aspect, they were Indian. They had come over a little bit before graduate school, had gone to get their PhDs. The husband of the couple was the oldest son, and felt like as the oldest son, at some point he was going to have to go back to India and take care of his parents.
Right.
And his wife was like, we ain't going back to India. Like, are you kidding me? Like, no, we're here. We're American now. And I they were about to have a kid and it was like, well, your kids are for sure going to be American. Like, no matter what you try to do, like every immigrant tries to create this like bubble of influence around their kids and then sends them off to school and their kids are American, right? That never works. And she was like, well, we'll have that argument later. There's no point in having it now. But she was like, what is he smoking? Like, no, we're not going back to live in India. Like and they were Indian. Like they grew up there. They left as adults. And she was like, no, it's unrealistic. And arguably India's same situation, right? Like economic power now, like things have changed a lot. Mm-hmm. It's not like they were asking her to go back and live in a quote unquote like mud hut in the middle, like so. Yeah, and that was the thing that you could see how China was getting, like they mentioned the family was, their old house was no longer there. Yeah. And she was so wistful for that. And like her grandmother is now in a kind of like a communal, it was an apartment building. It was a really nice apartment. It was a really nice apartment, but it was still limited. And one of the things that also coming from an American perspective is that we're so not used to servants versus like if you go any place else in the world, everyone has a servant and it makes sense. And there's a lot of domestic workers that are part. Like how many maids he went through. Billy was thinking about what was the last maids he saw because there was like different maids. Yeah. And the maid, one of the things that the maid did not know how to read when that was a plot thing. Said, "Oh, I was just picking up this document." And Billy asked, "Do you read it?" I said, "No, I don't know how to read." And like how that was just okay aspect of it about just some aspects about the different socioeconomic partialships of the culture, and I thought that was just interesting. I think there is something special about her particular family. They definitely seem more socioeconomically well off than most Chinese families. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Servants are definitely not a norm. Okay. Or even house family aides or senior aides doesn't really exist. There's actually not much of a need for senior aides in many cases because the families are obligated to take care of the seniors themselves. Although that seems to be changing over time. But whenever I've talked to anyone from China about the fact that we put, our aging parents in senior homes, they're aghast. Yeah. Like, how could you do that to them? I'm like, they would, it's harder to manage to take care of them. I mean, that goes on with different cultures as well, because I know that's a thing here for different minorities groups is that. Like African Americans, for example, you keep the family or take care of the family. You don't send them to a home that's. I'm white people. Cool. My parents are going to a home. But so let's sort of get into the central lie right at the heart of the movie. From your own personal point of view first, what did you think about them not telling the grandmother that she had cancer? I was I went through Billy's transformation because I could understand that totally. Yeah, it sucks, but then I realized it is kind of selfish that I want to tell her so I don't have to deal with this on my own, deal with the stress on my own, and I don't want to deal with that guilt versus. You should be willing to sacrifice for your family, and if it sacrifices means that you don't tell them everything just to protect them, and I think, and I don't know if we want to go to spoiler, but it seems like it works. Like one of the things that her aunt says is, "Cancer kills you. It's not the having the cancer, but knowing about the cancer or knowing about the terminal illness is that kills you." So, just as a sidebar to that line in the movie where the mother says, the Chinese have a saying, "Once you have cancer, you're dead," or something like that. And the director mentioned that everybody laughed. All the Americans laughed at that line. She's like, "That was not a laugh. That was not a laugh." That was exactly one of those scenes that everyone just buckled down laughing hysterically. I'm like, that wasn't meant to be funny at all. And it's not that I understood the Mandarin, but I understood the connotation behind it, saying that the knowledge of something is enough to kill you. But that was a perfect example of one of those scenes where the entire audience was roaring, and I was just sitting there mute. It's really sad. Well, cultural difference, right? So what did you think of the family's decision? I was really surprised at myself actually because I definitely consider myself to have more of an American mindset, and so
when Billy was like, oh, I don't want to tell her, or I do want to tell her, and the rest of the family was like, oh, we should not tell her. I went through the very exact same thing with some relatives of mine who were not doing so well as well, and I just, my teenage self was saying, you know, why don't you tell them, because that way they can enjoy their last minutes, their moments, the last days of their lives. And the response that I had gotten from my family was, what good would it do? Like it will not serve them any benefit except to make them worry. And if they worry, they will get gradually sicker and sicker more quickly. There's no reason for you to do that. From an individualistic culture perspective, you tell someone that, then they can deal with it themselves.
Right.
Versus a collectivist culture which says that, you know, the family will help you deal with this problem and this dilemma. And I really like what the brother said, because I could hear audible gasps from the audience behind me.
Really?
Because he articulated it so well. I'm not sure if the uncle actually said it that way, but that it made sense to them. It clicked to them. And when he said, you know, I'm going to paraphrase his words, but it's something along the lines of, if you, it is the responsibility of the family to share this emotional burden on behalf of someone you love and someone you care about. And I actually heard audible gasps from people behind me because they had never thought of it that way before.
Okay, we both had some weird audience. You had a weird audience.
I had a very heavily Asian audience.
I had an audience. I was seeing an event screening, and one of the people, while we were waiting for the movie to start, someone was saying, "Is this the sequel to Crazy Rich Asians?"
Oh, good God!
And like, me and my mom looked at each other, and like,
that makes me want to cry.
Yeah, so it's interesting to hear different perspectives from people who didn't really have that type of lifestyle, didn't grow up to know this aspect. But like you said, that explanation by the uncle was great. And it makes sense that a family is supposed to support individuals, and you have to make a sacrifice, or willing to make the sacrifice for the greater good, or for someone that you love.
So I was talking to a friend of mine who is actually from Azerbaijan, and his father is a doctor, and we're talking about the movie, and he was like, oh, no, we do that in Russia too. Mm-hmm. You don't tell people. And so the one small part of my brain was like, great, so every time I go to the doctor and the doctor's like, you're fine, I'm like, oh God, I'm dying of cancer. I was like, there's a flaw at the center of this logic that we can just ignore. But it's interesting as the person here to be like, nope. As soon as they said it, I was like, that's a fantastic idea. You should definitely not tell her. It will absolutely extend her life. Like, and they have, you know, I got into some medical reading a lot. I like those types of things. And they've sort of established that like palliative care prolongs people's life, and that we do a lot of these unnecessary interventions at the end that just really destroy somebody's quality of life. Mm-hmm. Just make the end miserable, where if you had chosen to not do any of those things, it's been studied that the people live longer, but more importantly, the time that they have left is better. And so with that in my mind, I was like, of course, this is a terrific idea. Why should you tell her? And you know, I do sort of see like saying, once you tell someone you're dying of cancer, it's like their body is, their mind, their will is going to go towards that end, and that not knowing could actually help them stay healthier. So I was behind it, and I was a little bit, both when I heard This American Life story and in the movie, I was a little perplexed that she was so against it. Like, it just seemed like such a kind, wonderful thing to do. I wish no one told me I have cancer.
See, that's the difference. See, there's the difference. I think it comes from that individualistic aspect. So I'm coming in from that. I want to know. I want to know as much as possible. I like knowing. I've had experiences of different times when things have happened and people didn't tell me, and I get upset. I'd rather know as soon as possible, and then I will deal with it myself. But
there's a key word.
Yeah, exactly.
Myself. I will deal with it by myself.
Exactly. I 100%. I own it. But like, I can understand lying to someone else. I'm like, I don't want to be lied to, but I will lie to someone else.
But I do think on the flip side, and I was glad, like I said, I felt like they played the male emotion a little bit too much for laughs. But when you see the cousin as he's, gets drunker and drunker, and so his emotional control starts to slip, like the actual practicality of going to China to say goodbye to your grandmother and pretending that everything is fine, I did sort of relate to how difficult it would be, whether or not you think the lie is a good idea, would you be able to pull it off?
It's draining. It's draining to lie to someone's face again and again and again. Not that I do that, but no, but I can understand that it's draining, and I'm glad they showed that emotional toll on everyone involved. And even with her difficult relationship with the mother, because her mother, and it was her father's grandmother who passed away. I'm sorry, father's grandmother, who's Nana, who was sick. The mother, Billy attacks her because, like, well, you're not crying or anything, and the mother's saying, like, I don't do that. I had to deal with my own parents' death, and I had to be strong and everything. And then if you don't cry, people think that you don't love them, and that's just not what I do.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something to be said in that in regards to culture, and the professional criers is a thing. It's a real thing.
Yes.
It's definitely something that is a legitimate thing, and it has a lot to do with
what does it have to do with?
Face, of course.
Okay.
And then appearances for the family. But it's a weird contrast between being stoic and also displaying that you're so distraught by some occurrence that you can't control yourself.
There's one thing that I did want to bring up to that point of the stoicism and the sort of Chinese character was probably my favorite aspect of the movie. What I thought she did so well was this is like a whole group of people who never tell each other anything. Like, there's more than one, like, well, for your own good, I didn't tell you type of incident in the movie. And yet, the family together is very warm, very intimate, has a great sort of teasing relationship. There's moments where, the grandmother's, like, feeding her from her own chopsticks. Like, they don't present the fact that they withhold things from each other as a limit to how close they actually are. And I thought it was really nice to see this sort of warm, loving Chinese family that goes so off script from what a Western sensibility would sort of paint, that, oh, they never tell each other anything. Like, how could they be close? Like, they're hiding so much. And she sort of shows, no, like, that's just how they are in this culture. It's not a reserve for them being close with each other. And I just love that part of the movie.
I think that might actually be part of that sort of collectivist culture. If you think about it, Christopher had mentioned before, it's draining to lie to someone all the time. Because when you're lying to someone, you're constantly thinking about and second guessing your moves, how they would impact the other person. So truly and really, they have the other people in their collectivist families in mind constantly and say, I am selecting which things to choose based on what I believe the impact will be on you. So it's 100% pure empathy all the time for everyone in the family. So versus just putting it all out there and say, here, you sort it out yourself, which is completely unempathetic. It's saying, like, I am going to carefully pick and choose how I communicate with you and when I communicate with you because I care about how it's going to impact you. I may be wrong.
That's a great.
No, I don't.
I think you're right.
Yeah,
right.
That was really profound. Thank you. I got nothing left to say. To wrap things all up, Dan, we like to give our movies a social impact score. This might be one of the most divergent ones we ever give. I'm so curious. So we sort of rate it as a movie and as we think of sort of the cultural impact of the film. So as a rating from 1 to 10, I'll let Christopher go first so you can hear his reasoning, not put you on the spot.
Can we put the new guy on the spot?
Thanks.
He's our guest, Christopher.
Oh, this is so
way to immediately revert back to Western culture and not think about Dan. Think only about yourself.
Considering my feelings here.
This is a hard one for me because I think the film is, like I said, it's doing great on Rotten Tomatoes. I liked that it's being distributed in America and China.
Yeah.
And I liked her perspective, and I liked what she did with the film. I wanted to do well.
Okay.
But I'm also so I'm going to give it I'm always very low on my numbers too, I think. Either a 6 or a 7, because I think that she has a good chance. This is I think it was brought for a lot of money for the distributor. So I think this has a good chance of making an effect and hoping to have more stories like this, showing that you don't have to choose between one culture or another, but you kind of are on that edge, and I would like to see more of that. But yeah, I want this to do well, so I'm gonna do a 6 or a 7.
Okay.
I'd probably say, depending on the audience, everyone's going to come at it with a different sort of where they are in their cultural continuum. People who are sort of on that brink of being able to recognize that cultures are just interactions between each other. They might get more social impact out of it, so it'd probably be more up like an 8 for them.
Yep.
But then you have the folks who are sort of in the line with Christopher and his mother saying, is this the sequel to Crazy Rich Asians? In which case there's not going to be a whole lot to take away from it. So that would be more like a 6 or 7.
Okay. I'm gonna give this a 5 because I'm knocking back a few points for just liking the radio story so much better. There's another aspect to that too, which I didn't want to get into and will feed into my recommendation. Like, I'm a little bit frustrated as to how new everybody thinks this is. And I'm a little like, this isn't new. This story's been told more than once. And not only has it been told more than once, it's been told more than once about Chinese families. Like, so there was a little bit of like, maybe this time it will stick, but I don't know. And I just thought, I don't know. People haven't seen enough good Chinese movies, so.
To be fair, I think if Crazy Rich Asians hadn't occurred, this movie would not have occurred. It would have gotten the funding that it needed. Right.
I guess it's like, Ang Lee did this 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And, so my recommendation for the week is go back and see Ang Lee's first 2 Chinese movies, Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, and particularly The Wedding Banquet, which is hilarious and talks all about the cultural confusion under the lens of also the son being gay. Like, I just am like, this, people, I don't know. I'm a little frustrated that these things always seem to keep being new.
Yeah.
It makes me feel sad, I guess.
We can go back to Black Panther and Meteor Man and things like that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So it's like, how long are Chinese people going to have to reinvent their culture for Americans? I mean, I guess every generation is going to get its own Joy Luck Club.
Exactly.
To that end, I gave you my recommendations. Go see some old good Ang Lee stuff. Do you have a recommendation for the week?
I finally started watching Star Trek Discovery and actually enjoying it a lot. And cool. I'm enjoying it.
Thank you, Dan, for coming here and opening up about some of your personal experiences.
Thank
really
you.
Valuable.
Thanks for having me.
So if you like having Dan as a guest on and you like our podcast, we could really use some reviews on iTunes and recommend us to your friends. Website, moviesthatmatterpodcast.com. We'll have all the links to things we talked about in our show notes and on the website. If you want to leave us a comment, please use our Facebook page or on Twitter with our tag @MoviesMatterPod, and check next week to see what movie we're going to be overanalyzing next. And remember, movies matter.
And so do you.
We'll see you next time.